Welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And in today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about NIL, name, image, and likeness in college, and some of the big deals that we're starting to see. So, of course, we've got Quinn Ewers. We've got Travis Hunter going to Jackson State University. We've got Nick Saban coming out saying that Bryce Young is making $1 million. So we're going to look at some of those large deals that have occurred and just dive in and kind of see what we know at this point. Again, name, image, and likeness is a huge change. We've been over it before, and previously, and anyone that's done college athletics before knows that getting any money for being an athlete was a huge no-no. If you took shoes from a local company, a local running company, or you were in the volleyball team and you took something from a local company, you were in big trouble and probably wouldn't be running or playing volleyball or whatever. Now, obviously in the revenue generating sports, that might be a little bit different. In basketball and football and those kinds of things, you might have gotten a little more leeway, and I'm sure there was much more going on. But in those, especially those non-revenue generating sports, there really wasn't anything there, and you were really taking a risk by doing anything in that manner. So what we've seen are a couple really high-profile NIL deals that are kind of the poster child for this new era, basically, where we're going to have name, image, and likeness available to all collegiate athletes. So we're going to look at three big names. You've got Bryce Young, who's the current Heisman Trophy winner. He's also, of course, playing in the national championship against Georgia, quarterback for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Then you've got Travis Hunter, who just committed to Jackson State University. In many people's rankings, he's the number one overall player. He was looking at Florida State, a couple other large schools, and Jackson State got him, which of course is coached by Deion Sanders, the great Deion Sanders. He's the coach of Jackson State University. He himself was a cornerback. This number one overall player was a cornerback. And then we've got Quinn Ewers, who left early from high school in Texas, went to Ohio State, and now is back. Went to Ohio State as an early enrollee and now is back at Texas. So these are a couple large profile NIL deals that, reportedly are worth over $1 million. So let's dive in and look at what those three deals consist of. So let's look at the three athletes. We'll start with Bryce Young. So Bryce Young, of course, is the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback of the Crimson Tide, about to play Georgia in the national championship. But at the beginning of the season, he had only thrown 13 passes, and he signed NIL deals worth right around $1 million. According to Alex Scarborough of ESPN, and I got this from a Saturdays Down South article that quoted him, Bryce Young had $800,000 of NIL deals, which were deals with the Cash App, Leaf, Wildcard, and Onyx. They also mentioned that Bryce Young was represented by CAA, which is a major talent agency that actually has a lot of ESPN's personalities represented by them. You'll also notice that Bryce Young is on a podcast under the network The Volume, which is Colin Cowherd's podcast network. So Bryce Young is working or being paid by Colin Cowherd's company, basically, to do the Volume podcast. So that's a little bit about what we know on Bryce Young. Let's go to Quinn Ewers. So in Quinn Ewers, according to multiple reports, and again, he was a star Texas quarterback, high school Texas quarterback, left before his senior year to go enroll early at Ohio State in a very crowded quarterback room and signed NIL deals worth something like $1.4 million. Additionally, did a deal with Holy Kombucha for equity in the company for another payment. So very lucrative in going to Ohio State. Now, of course, he transfers back to Texas. So Bryce Young is kind of that more traditional path where you've got a player at a college, they're very good, they're marketable, they go and they sign this deal and they play for that college. Quinn Ewers It's a different case, very high profile case. He went from high school, left early, went to go get the NIL money, went to a very crowded quarterback room, a situation where most likely they wouldn't play that early enroll year, but, could potentially play in the future. And what do you know? Here he's come back to Texas. So he signed an NIL deal in and around Ohio State. They weren't paying him specifically. Signed an NIL deal in going to Ohio State, and then ended up transferring back to Texas. So that's sort of point two, or way that it happens too. So that's sort of another way that it happens. And again, we're looking at three very high profile cases. They're all a little bit different. So now we'll go to the third one, which is Travis Hunter. Now he, of course, is a cornerback who committed to Jackson State University, which is an FCS school, not FBS. So not the sort of the top 20. So not sort of the top 120 schools, but the series below that, the FCS, which is what Jackson State plays in. Of course, they're coached by Deion Sanders, who's a huge personality, who's a cornerback. Obviously, was a cornerback, and then was, played baseball as well, and obviously extremely famous athlete. He's the coach at this FCS Jackson State, and he lured Travis Hunter to Jackson State. Now, again, he's a high-profile coach. He's a cornerbacks coach. He's a former cornerback. This guy plays that position, so it makes sense there. But to go to FCS school over an FBS as the number one overall recruit, which is what he was, and decommitting from Florida State, which is a school that he had committed to, or effectively kind of been committed to since March of 2020. He decommits from Florida State, commits to this FCS school. Now, again, there were initially claims that when he signed this deal with Jackson State, it came with a $1.5 million barstool deal that has since been sort of negated or denied by Mississippi Clarion Ledger reporter Kari Thompson. She cited multiple sources that said the deal did not actually happen. There was not that $1.5 million barstool deal, but of course there are other deals in the works. And additionally, Barstool does have an NIL program, and they have many, many athletes signed up to that in varying capacities. Now, one thing to note, and this comes from an article on extrapoints.com by Matt Brown. One of the very few stipulations that we have in the NIL is that it can't be pay for play. So you're signing a name, image, and likeness deal based on you, based on your personality, based on your brand, in a sense. And it can't be directly, if you score this touchdown, you get these points. If you don't score this touchdown, you don't get these points. Or if you score this touchdown, you get this money. If you don't score this touchdown, you don't get the money. It can't be set up in that manner. That's sort of one of the really only large stipulations that we know so far. And that was clearly evident in the Ohio State case with Quinn Ewers, where he was not a factor on the field, still got the money, and then ended up heading out to a different school and transferring back to Texas, where, again, many of those NIL deals will remain in place. Potentially more will come, et cetera, et cetera. But it brings up an interesting point. So that's three very high-profile cases, these cases that everybody was talking about when they were talking about NIL initially, the $1 million plus deals. These are three different deals done three different ways. They've had some real effects, and the players have gone about them in very different ways. Again, transferring out early from high school. Will we see more of that? Transferring from a big FBS school to a smaller school where there might be more NIL opportunity. Will we see more of that? And then obviously there's the classic case of player on a team, playing on the team, making good money. Does that affect the team, locker room, etc.? That remains to be seen. But it's an interesting point, and I'm not the first one to bring this up. A lot of people have brought this up, this idea that there's not a lot of rules out there. So as Lane Kiffin mentioned, the head coach of Ole Miss, he sort of said, I hope these kids are getting what's promised to them. And again, it's what kind of contracts are they signing? Are the schools helping to facilitate these? Do the schools have robust programs in place to help these students, to help these student athletes sign deals that make sense? Or is it just one of the kind of situations where, in Bryce Young's case, he was a high-profile player. He was able to go out, get CAA to represent him, and then they handle the contracts. It's not always going to be the case. The volleyball player with 2,000 Instagram followers is not necessarily going to be able to go out and get CAA to represent them. Do they have something at that school that helps them? If you're a volleyball player going to Clemson, say, is there a program there to help you help broker that? And what does that look like? So it's interesting. This is the start. There'll be more on this. We'll have more podcasts on this. There'll be more talk on this as it develops. But it's probably the biggest thing to happen in college athletics in a very long time. And we're starting to see some effects and some real big moves on these high dollar NIL deals. So that's just a little bit about those three players. We don't know a lot, but that's just some basic background on the NIL. And again, we'll revisit in the future as there will be many developments, I'm sure. So thank you for joining us on this short podcast. Have a great day.